The Jonathan Benaya podcast is not only inspired by nature and travel, but by the people that work in it and those that are passionate about it.
Now, fear is part of life within the animal kingdom. This fear has an impact on the food chain. And I kind of get the feeling that it also impacts animal behavior and the surrounding ecosystems as well. I get the feeling that it does also affect breeding patterns in the wild as well. When it comes to the African bush, predators are quite easily the most feared creatures out there. They are feared by both the animals in the wild, but they are also feared by tourists like you and me who go on safari to see them. Now, I don't know if I should call it fear or it is more of respect. Now, that's subject for debate. Now, for some of us who've been fortunate enough to see a predator like a lion or my personal favorite animal, the leopard, when you see them on safari and actually look into their eyes, you often get this feeling of, I don't know if I should call it a sensation, but it's basically a feeling that makes your tummy bubble. Oftentimes, as you peek out of that safari jeep and marvel at the sheer power of those magnificent beasts, you must think deep within your soul, what could possibly scare them? I mean, what could possibly scare an animal like a lion? Well, through my wild wanderings, as well as the conversations that I continue to have with people in the wildlife and conservation space, I'm slowly learning that all animals actually possess some sort of fear. Yes, including those celebrated hunters of the African bush that we all love. Now, quite fascinatingly though, when you run a quick poll, if you went to social media and did a quick public poll, you'd realize that the majority, or call it the most feared animals, are quite simply the most loved animals as well. They are what most tourists come to see on safari, and I might guess right that they are the type of animals that you are also looking for when you go out with family and friends on a safari to any of the national parks. I know that for a fact because every time I'm out in the bush, I see the vast majority of Land Cruisers and safari vans are on a pursuit, or call it a treasure hunt, to find these celebrities of the African wilderness. Now, in today's episode, we discuss the incredible world of these great predators that we all so dearly love. I'm joined by 3 experts, call them scientists, and we will take a long drive into the world of large carnivores. We'll also briefly discuss the Uganda Large Carnivore Strategic Action Plan, which is currently being developed, but the gentlemen of the podcast today did make significant contributions to the action plan, especially with the large carnivore census that they've been carrying out. So I hope you are somewhere comfortable. Get yourself a pillow, get a blanket, maybe get yourself some coffee, tea, it could be hot chocolate, and just create a comfortable space wherever you are tuning in from, and let's take this awesome journey together. On the show today, I have Dr. Alex Braczkowski. He's a career conservation biologist and wildlife photographer whose work has been featured on platforms like Disney Plus and National Geographic. I'm also excited to have Bosco Atukwase and Orin Cornille, who are both field coordinators currently working with the large carnivores in Uganda. Dr. Alex joins the podcast from Brisbane, Australia, while Orin will be joining us from Belgium, where I guess it's just 1 hour behind Kampala. Then Bosco, I believe, is somewhere within the Ugandan wilderness, following lions, following predators. And together with this incredible team, we will have an engaging discussion today. The podcast is made available by our Patreons, and today's episode is specifically sponsored by my good friends at Zencastr. I'm your host, Jonathan Benaya, and this is the Jonathan Benaya Podcast. What's up, my beautiful people? Welcome to the Jonathan Benaya Podcast, a show that is wild, very wild. We are proudly Uganda's #1 conservation and tourism show, but we also benefit from a listenership from all across the African continent and the world at large. We try to put out a new episode every Sunday with discussions ranging around how to make the natural world a better place, creating awesome images, telling stories with words, wildlife films and photography, with occasional musings on sound and tech. If these topics fascinate you as much as they interest me, I promise you this podcast will have you in a spin. I do share a lot of my personal experiences, and from time to time, I'll have 1 or 2 guests on the podcast to have some very insightful discussions. So thank you so much for tuning in, and enjoy your time here. Welcome back to the Jonathan Bena podcast, where we talk about the earth, images, words, wildlife films and photography, tourism and travel, and occasionally music. On the podcast today, we explore the fascinating world of large carnivores. But before we dive right in, let's just quickly get to meet our guests today. I think let's start with Orin. Orin, please say hi to the listeners. And maybe as you do that, just let us know, where does your journey begin? How do you find yourself following prides of lions, tracking down leopards, working with large carnivores?
Well, hello, my name is Orin. I was lucky to be brought up in Africa. So my passion for the African wildlife has always been there. And one day I got lucky and met Alex, and we worked out, and somehow I got a job through Alex in the Ugandan conservation scene. So it's been a cool year and a little bit working in the Ugandan conservation scene. It's a very interesting place to work. It is ever-changing and ever-developing, which is also one of the key things which I like about it. Is it's like a big puzzle you're trying to fix the whole time. So that's a bit of my story.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much for joining the podcast, Orin, and I look forward to your input later on in the podcast. Now, let's now bring in Bosco. Bosco, you're welcome to the podcast. Please greet the listeners, and also, as you do that, just let us know, where did your journey begin, your journey of working in the bush, especially with the large carnivores? Welcome to the podcast, Bosco.
Yeah, good morning, Benia. Thank you for welcoming me to today's podcast. I would love to greet the listeners. My name is Atukwase Bosco, and I'm a Ugandan by nationality. And I would love to extend my thanks to you and your team for welcoming me, and my team as well.
Yeah.
Start with how I gained the passion of conserving these carnivores. Firstly, I grew up from a village that's next to Queen Elizabeth National Park.
Okay.
And that is located in Katerera, which is in Rubirizi district. That is an area in which Queen Elizabeth is part. In my earliest stages of development, there was a lot of poisoning, a lot of poaching taking place, and some of it was focused on these carnivores, of which after my high school, I really chose to go study on how best to conserve them. And that's how I finished my diploma course in wildlife natural resource management, after which I got attached to these conservation entities.
Okay. I'm
really passionate about my job, and one reason as to why I love conserving these carnivores is that they've been kind of neglected from the conservation list, because a few people know about the biology, about the ecology, the behavior, and that's why I really wanted to take part and give a step into this as a young Ugandan. Thank you.
Okay. Well, that's interesting. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
All right, and now last but not least, we have Dr. Alex Braczkowski. Kindly say hello to the listeners, and also just let us know as well, where does your journey with science begin? How do you find yourself in this world of science, especially the work that you do around the large carnivores on the African continent?
Yeah, so how's it going, everybody? My name's Alex. I'm a South African conservation biologist, and a lot of my work focuses on big carnivores, mainly big cats. And I guess my kind of science journey started in near Cape Town, in a small town called George, where I went to a university called Nelson Mandela University. And it's an interesting campus because it's probably one of the only places in the world where leopards live on the same campus where the students go to school. So that was also the first place where I did like a small camera trap and diet study of leopards. And then from that, I got a few opportunities working with various people, including Guy Baum and David MacDonald at the University of Oxford, also on leopards. And so that was my master's work. And then later I was very lucky and I got an apprenticeship with a famous National Geographic photographer called Steve Winter. I worked with him for about 5 years on the photography side of things, of big cats. And then in 2016, I started my PhD on lions and other carnivores in Uganda. And that's pretty much where I've focused 90% of my work over the last 7 years, apart from Sri Lanka and a few small projects in South Africa. That's where I've put most of my heart, money, soul, time, belief, dedication, failures, sadness. It's all been placed into Uganda's lions. So that's kind of my journey. And I'm excited to be chatting to Jonathan today.
Wow, what an amazing story. And I must say it's a pleasure to have you on the show today. I'm a great admirer of the work that you do and your team as well. So thank you so much for joining the podcast. Now, just quickly, Dr. Alex, just before I assume that all my listeners know what a large carnivore is, do you mind just giving us, if I could call it, a brief masterclass on who qualifies to be among what we're calling the large carnivores in the animal kingdom? What animals fall under that category? And maybe as you do that, let us know, for the case of the African continent, what specific animals are we actually talking about when we mention large carnivores?
It's a good question, and it fundamentally comes down to anatomy and the classification of different animal families and genera and phyla. So if you look at the large carnivores and the carnivores in general, the order Carnivora, they are defined by the presence of a specific tooth configuration, the presence of a tooth called the carnassial. It's at the back of the jaw, and what those do is they kind of act like scissors in shearing meat, unlike any other mammal in the animal kingdom. So that really is the kind of centerpiece of how they are classified. And then there's obviously skull characteristics, there's evolutionary lineages and clades that further divide. So for instance, the big cats, they will be a separate genetic evolutionary lineage to, for instance, large canids, dogs. And hyenas will be yet another distinct evolutionary lineage. And again, those lineages are made not only genetically, but also according to their anatomical features. So with things like the Panthera, for example, the big cats, they're actually really, it's the big cats that are the roaring cats. They're largely classified by the presence of, I think the spelling is the hyonoid apparatus. And it's basically essentially a fused voice box that allows them to project audibly very loud roars. And that is something that other cats, like cheetahs, like small house cats, cannot do. And that's a key kind of characteristic as to how they are grouped. So the jaguar, the lion, the tiger, the snow, I think the snow leopard is in there. It's always in and out. And then obviously the leopard. So those guys are distinctly in one grouping. So I don't know if that answers your question, but yeah.
Wow. Well, there you go, my listeners. There's something new to learn today already. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Alex, for that brief masterclass on what a large carnivore is. Now, let me just bring in Orin. I'm fascinated by how you guys end up working with the large carnivores. But I'm also interested in knowing whether you have a favorite animal among the large carnivores that you would say maybe fascinates you the most. So let us know what your favorite large carnivore is. And maybe as you do that, maybe also just build a case for why these animals, if I could call them the celebrities of the African bush, are such a big deal.
Yeah. My favorite carnivore will have to be the lion. It's a social hunter with a very intricate social system, which intrigues me. A leopard, therefore, does not have this social behavior that a lion has, and that's why the lion really intrigues me, because they have these very complex pride setups that to this day I don't think are fully understood. So that really intrigues me. And then why are carnivores so loved or so important is, they give us a good indicator on how healthy a population in a national park is. And we're not just talking about the population of the carnivores, it's also for the ungulates that it will show if the carnivore population is somehow stable or somehow healthy. It will represent the entirety of the ecosystem. And also, it's a very important aspect to tourism. A lot of people come, especially to come and see these large carnivores, and I think that's also a big pull into Africa, is coming to see these animals in the wild and not just in the zoo.
All right, now Bosco, I think it's the right time to bring you back into the conversation. Your name indeed sounds Ugandan, and you did say you are a Ugandan. Bosco, I'd like to know, from a cultural point of view, or call it a social African structure, how are these animals viewed, especially the large carnivores? If you look at the traditional, or call it the indigenous African structure, the African community, how are animals like the lions, the leopards viewed within the community? And also just let us know currently what kind of human-wildlife relations are we looking at, are we seeing, especially in the areas that you guys are working in?
Thank you, Benia, once again. First and foremost, from the cultural perspective of conservation of these carnivores. Initially in Uganda, there was not so much attachment on the large carnivores, except for a few tribes like the Baganda and the Banyankole, who would really, who had different tribes embracing the existence of these animals as their totems. And this set people together and united them in a certain single units where they considered themselves as brothers and sisters, in a way that people of the same clan like that would not marry each other because they were considered as brothers and sisters. These totems would bring people together and help them to strengthen the bond and that was attached to the existence of these large carnivores. And if you look outside Uganda, like the Maasai people, you would definitely know that killing a lion was seen as a sign of bravery, and it was a way how these young men would be recruited into adulthood.
Yeah.
Once a person killed a lion, they would have shown their steadiness and strength and ability to be a real man. The other one, second question when I look at the human-wildlife relations as far as conservation is concerned for the large carnivores, it's not the best at the moment, because the time we thought that the conservation would be getting stronger within the communities, but it actually seems to be doing the opposite. As you may have seen or heard, we've had a number of challenges and ever-increasing human population. You will find that different homesteads have quite a number of children to take care of, and that would definitely require need for land for expansion, and that also results into land fragmentation, where you find that small piece of land is even chopped into smaller pieces to fit and divide in amongst the children. This causes continuous competition, and people start encroaching the parklands, and as the grazers and cattle keepers competing with the wild animals for the same pastures, leads to also spread of zoonoses. Zoonoses, I mean zoonotic diseases, those that can be in people and in animals. So when these carnivores also get subjected to feed on their cows, because cows, that's an easy prey. Putting down a goat is worth 1,000 times easier than putting down a cob. When they eat their cows, and that's where they start poisoning them, because they are obviously trying to protect their source of income. And you find that these communities also have a sensation that having a big herd is a sign of respect and prestige, and thus they have to protect their cows and like every kind of livestock.
Your livestock.
On the other hand, you realize that the communities that are enabling the parks have failed to get involved in conservation, because firstly, they have absolutely not any interest. And you may ask me why they're not interested, because first of all, they receive opposition from their cultural leaders, because they asked, how would you support conservation of an animal that is putting down the conservation, that is putting down the source of your income, the source of your livelihood? Definitely that makes sense. But you also find that some of these cultures will discover that actually they understand what they are doing. By killing these carnivores, they are trying to protect their lives and livelihoods. If a cat ate their cows and they lose, that would mean that there is a big loss, and that would cause poverty to them.
Okay, so what you're basically saying is the conflict, as I call it conflict, or the challenges that we see have been around for a while. They've only just been amplified.
Sure. And on the other side, as I've explained, due to increased population, people are, instead of being creative and innovative into projects that can earn them money, they find it even easier to go poaching, because one night you kill a buffalo and that's hundreds of thousands of shillings, instead of maybe probably working for a month for the same pay. And if that would be on the side of communities to benefit directly from the protected areas, that would be quite important, which is not happening at the moment.
Okay. Wow, that's some interesting insights, and I really like the discussion around really getting the community to feel and really appreciate conservation. Conservation is usually a closed user group. It seems to be a discussion that remains within the conservation community. But I like that you bring it up that, especially with the communities that live and have to really face with the facts of fending off some of these animals, chasing them away from their livestock on a daily basis.
Yeah, you can imagine.
I think that's a very interesting, Now, before we actually go into the detail, or rather chat about the strategic action plan for Uganda's large carnivores, and also chat briefly about the contribution that you guys did and the census that you carried out, I'd like to hear again from Dr. Alex. Alex, the challenge facing wild predators, I believe, is quite a worldwide issue, and it's certainly a continental issue as well. When I read literature, it seems to not be a Uganda-only issue, and it seems to actually be an African issue and also a global issue. So I'd like to know from you if you could just help us paint a picture of what the situation is at the global level, and maybe bring it down to a continental level, and maybe let us know how Uganda is performing in relation to that macro level. So I'm talking about the macro level, that's a global and continental level, then maybe just bringing it down to the Ugandan setting, which I'd maybe call the micro level.
I think the important thing to remember here is for us to take a step back and to actually ask the question, do we have a good pulse on carnivore, and specifically let's use lion populations as a starting point across the continent. So the broad numbers that have been thrown around are something in the ballpark of 18 to 35,000 lions left in Africa. But as part of my PhD work, I looked into this problem, to see how well are these numbers being measured, and are we actually measuring lion populations? And the question broadly is, the scientific field fails dismally to monitor these things. And this is actually what I think should be kind of the leading argument being made in the conservation of these big cats. If I can draw an analogy, if you or your friend are in a car crash that happens to be quite serious, and you land up at a hospital and you suddenly get placed into an intensive care unit bed, and the doctors start to put various tubes and monitoring mechanisms into your arms, into your chest, to basically try and figure out, okay, what are the vital signs of this patient? How is Jonathan, or how is Alex, or how is Orin, or how are the viewers at home doing in this intensive care situation? What is their heart rate? What is their breath rate? What is the saturation of oxygen in their blood? And you can imagine, on the screens, you have those, what we call vital signs. And then we can go to work as doctors and start to figure out, okay, maybe we can stitch up the patient. Maybe we can do a blood transfusion. Maybe we can, hold down the blood loss from the leg. And Jonathan, unfortunately, when it comes to lions and big cats in a lot of places in Africa, we don't have those vital signs. And we don't do the vital sign measurement against the input of conservation actions. And this is where really my work, Orin's work, Bosco's work, and our broader team of colleagues has really tried to find a niche in the Ugandan context, is how do we help the Uganda government and the non-governmental organizations that are working in these parks start to establish these vital signs of the populations. So I know I didn't answer the question in its totality, but we need to take a step back and look at the problem. And the problem is, in half of the places in Africa, we don't even know how many of these lions we have left. So that's what we've been trying to do in Uganda, is to figure out how many are there, in which protected areas, across what land surface areas, and how do these populations necessarily respond against certain conservation interventions.
Well, you might not have answered the question directly, but you brought up some very interesting nuggets. I really liked your mention of the challenge around the data, or call it the numbers, the statistics, the fact that we don't really know how many of these animals we have. And indeed, your analogy of the hospital, or rather the medical setting, kind of brings it out very well. And I think for the listeners and myself, it's definitely food for thought. All right, now we're going to have a short break just to get to know our Safari Spotlight of the Week. When we return, the team and I will now have a chat about Uganda's large carnivore strategic action plan and also the census that Dr. Alex, Orin, and Bosco and the team carried out in support or in contribution to developing what we are now working on as the strategic action plan. The conversation continues shortly. Our safari spotlight of the week is from Uganda. It's a safari lodge that is mostly a stone and timber structure that was converted from an old coffee store. It's located in the eastern sector of Queen Elizabeth National Park with the Rwenzori Mountains in view. This stunning property is one of the lodges under the Volcanoes portfolio. Yes, those folks who've operated camps and lodges across Uganda and Rwanda since 1997. With quick access to the Chambura Gorge, which I like to call the famous Valley of the Apes, for you guys wanting to do some of that chimpanzee tracking. And just a drive away from the Kazinga Channel where most boat safaris happen. And the perfect base to set off for game drives in the park's vast wilderness. This communal lodge is by distance the most luxurious option in Queen Elizabeth National Park. So ladies and gentlemen, our safari spotlight of the week is the lovely Chambura Gorge Lodge. Fantastic. Well, shout out to Chambura Gorge Lodge, a beautiful property indeed in Queen Elizabeth National Park. All right, guys, welcome back to the Jonathan Benaya podcast. I'm still your host, Jonathan Benaya, and we are still having a chat about the world of large carnivores. Now, let me just resume the discussion with Orin. Orin, I did read in the news about a meeting that was held a couple of weeks ago. I think that was last month in Kampala, where several experts gathered, experts, if I could call them expert scientists, who are working in this field of large carnivores on the continent. And the reason that brought them together, what I had, is this thing called Uganda's Large Carnivore Strategic Action Plan. So I'd like to know a bit about it, and maybe my three-part question would be, what is the action plan exactly? What is it about? What are the objectives? What are you guys trying to aim for? And maybe help me and the listeners know why it is something that we should all be really ecstatic about.
Yeah, so a couple of weeks ago, we, with the help of UA, held a workshop in Proteo Hotel in Kampala, where a lot of the stakeholders in the Ugandan conservation context came together to basically present the work they've been doing over the last couple of years and also assess the problems that we're having in our day-to-day work and together brainstorming for solutions that we could have in the next couple of years for the problems that are there at the moment. So generally speaking, we all came together to put our minds and put our efforts together to find solutions for the problems that we are all facing, because we're all facing the same problems in these national parks. As NGOs, as government organizations, we all have the same thing that we're fighting for. So we're trying to achieve the same goal. So what it was generally about, it was we tried to assess the problems so that everyone was on the same page about what is going wrong and what is potentially going well. And then try to find solutions for the problems that we are having at the moment. And why the public should be ecstatic? Well, it gives new hope. It gives fresh ideas. There were a lot of young people with a lot of good input, and those moments might, we could possibly have a new impact in the next 10 years that will hopefully stabilize the populations in Uganda for large carnivores. Because generally the trend in Africa is we are losing these populations quite quickly, and if we don't act now, we might lose it altogether. So I think it brings hope, and hope is something we can all be happy about and ecstatic about. Yeah.
All right, well, those are some very interesting insights, Orin, and I think it would be interesting for us to actually, I guess, get a bit more detail, maybe from Bosco, regarding what areas, or rather what locations was the study carried out. And also, I know when we talk about large carnivores, that's quite a big term. So it might interest my listeners to also know what specific animals were you guys studying.
Well, thank you once again, Daniel, for this other opportunity. And I would love to point out the fact that there is still quite a number of carnivores, starting with the blue whales, the sharks, the bears, and many more others. When we talk about our African continent and specifically Uganda, we talk about the lions, leopards, and hyenas. So when you asked of the locations where we actually carried out the survey, it was such a big team that started from Pianope and Lake Mburo National Park, and the same was also being done in Murchison Falls National Park. I was, however, glad that I started with the Kidepo Valley National Park, and then
nice.
Sister to Queen Elizabeth National Park, and then Tourism Lake Water Reserve. And those are the 6 key destinations in which the survey was conducted.
Well, that's fantastic, Bosco, and I'm really looking forward to seeing the fresh figures for various large carnivores in Uganda. But let me bring in Orin again before we then listen to a question that came in from one of the listeners. Orin, I'd like to hear from you again regarding what exactly you folks were measuring, or if I could call it, what particular studies were you doing or carrying out during the process of the surveys and the animal censuses that you were carrying out. Maybe the more interesting question would be, how were you carrying out these surveys or studies? I guess this is a question around the methodology that you used to come up with the figures that you're yet to publish. I know for a fact, wherever I read, measuring or rather counting or carrying out a census on an animal like a leopard is quite a challenging feat. So I'd be interested in knowing what approach, what methodology you guys used on this particular census.
So for lions, we used search and encounter, where we basically just drive around and look for these animals while we're keeping a GPS track of where we are going. So whenever we would encounter a lion, we would note down the time, the date, the amount of lions and the sex of the individuals. And then we would take whisker pattern spots. So we would take pictures of the front of the face and as many pictures actually of recognizable parts of this animal. And this would then go into a database where we have these huge mathematical equations that we can figure out an abundance estimate. We can figure out a sex ratio. We can figure out home range sizes, all from that data set. And then for leopards, generally what we used is camera trapping. So we would camera trap a certain area with an amount of camera traps, which we would put on one side of a road or an animal trail, and then another camera on the other side of the road, so that we could get both flanks of a leopard or a hyena. And then we would use the spot patterns for that individual to then try and match them with other pictures that you would get throughout the census. So like this, you could then estimate population size and an abundance size in that certain area. But I think if I missed something, Alex will help me out on that.
Yeah, so the only thing that I'd add to what Orin said is just trying to appreciate the scale of what we did last year. So if you look at historically, the Ugandan picture has largely been a data deficient one. So there's very little information available across time. When there is information, it's usually a one-off, and the methods that were used were pretty imprecise. Pull-up surveys, total counts. But there's one fundamental problem also, historically, the work has always been done by one entity, and usually an NGO. So it's very difficult for all stakeholders to understand what's happening, who did what, and sort of gauge the veracity of those results. So what we did during last year's census is we engaged the Uganda Wildlife Authority and actually tried to implement the national census using all of the stakeholders that were present in these different landscapes. You can imagine, you can kind of look at this as a collaborative national census. We had over 100 Ugandan and international collaborators helping us try and determine the numbers of carnivores across every major protected area system in the country. It's the biggest attempt ever done in Uganda. And what we are really proud of is that we had everybody from Makerere students to lodges. So we had like Wild Frontiers, we had volcano safaris, we had independent scientists from Makerere, we had snares to wares, we had Uganda Wildlife Authority rangers that were actually involved in the data creation process, collection process. We'll be presenting some of those results at a conference in Rwanda in July this year. But basically it was this idea of trying to bring all the people that already work in these landscapes together to help us deliver this. Because the fundamental problem is that you can't really do this by yourself. The lion home ranges, the lion spatial extent in these protected areas is too big. So you need as many people working together as possible to deliver a robust census. And that's what we did. We tried to bring as many people, over 100 people across the country to work with us.
Okay. Would you feel like that, is that a continental challenge where you have like so many guys that are doing good work, good conservation work? Do you feel like it's a challenge that, I guess, if all these NGOs, all these partners join together, we would be able to achieve a lot more?
I think if I speak frankly, what I think a lot of carnivore biologists and a lot of biologists and a lot of business owners and a lot of just humans suffer from generally is a sense of ownership over something. And this is particularly pronounced when it comes to things like lions. So what you'll typically see happening in these landscapes is that a project will become very territorial. And despite the fact that sometimes, it might be 3 Americans running a lion project in the Serengeti, their viewpoint will largely, maybe they won't say it, but they will be like, these are my lions. These are our lions. This is our area. And anybody else, stay out. So that's just a problem generally when it comes to working with big charismatic animals. And I think these collaborative censuses, especially if the government has the central foot to say you have to work together, breaks down some of those barriers and breaks down some of those territorial behaviors potentially.
Well, that's fantastic. Well, I sit here and think about all the hours that you guys would have to spend in the bush to follow some of these animals in order to get a representative enough sample for you to come up with your calculations and conclusions. But it really sounds like a huge scope of work that you guys were engaged in. But it also sounds fun for someone like myself who likes the bush. Okay, I think we're going to have the listener's question right now. Our listener's question of the week comes in from, I believe, a lady called Murungi Anna. My colleague Ashley will read it out.
This week's listener's question is from Anna Murungi, and she asks the following. The human-wildlife conflict in Uganda has led to the poisoning of many lions in recent years. So I would like to ask 3 questions. Firstly, I would like to know what strategies or plans are in place to ensure the survival of the remaining ones, without necessarily compromising the communities living around the park. My second question is about the rumor of one of the collared leopards in one of Uganda's national parks that has become used to being fed and is behaving like a domestic cat. What conservation values is the Carnivore project in that national park communicating? Finally, please share the current statistics for Uganda's large carnivores. Thank you.
Well, thanks, Ashley, and thanks, Anna, for that question. The gentleman on the podcast, I don't know, Dr. Alex, Orin, Bosco, I don't know who wants to go for it.
Maybe I will answer the first question and then Orin can take the last two. So the first question pertains to Queen Elizabeth National Park. And really it's, people might say, oh, it's complex, it's difficult, oh, it's so hard. But really it's a simple question. And it's actually a question that lies, it's a question that, government officials can answer. And the question is, can 30,000 people living inside a national park with thousands of cattle continue to successfully live alongside 39 lions? Because that's what Uganda's Queen Elizabeth now has, 39. The population halved in the last 5 years. The last census in 2018 showed 72. It's now 39. So a 46% decline in less than 5 years. So that is it's a political issue of why are there cows living inside a national park where there's almost no lions left. So that's the answer to question one, and then Orin can answer the question about the leopard and the...
Well, the leopard in question, I think, is Grace, which is one of the leopards we have in Queen Elizabeth, which is collared. She's been through a lot, and she's been through a couple of operations. So when she was in her phases of getting better from those operations, there were points where they would feed her just to make sure that she would survive. This then caused for that leopard to get very used to humans and very used to human vehicles. So that answers your question, why does it look like it's a domesticated animal? I don't think there is a big problem in that, because in a sense we can't just let these animals fend for themselves anymore. I mean, we are playing a role in these parks, so it's not just let nature be. And this is part of a habituation process. I mean, if you really see wild lions or wild leopards, there is no way you would ever get as close as you can in a tourist area. So to say that there is a certain conservation message being portrayed, I'm not sure that is right. I think this is just a natural process of mass tourism into an area. These animals will get used to vehicles, human behavior, etc.
Well, that's interesting, and it's quite an interesting way to put it. I believe it kind of puts it in perspective. And I must confess, I'm one of those people that was also a bit skeptical about how that particular leopard behaves, especially when you encounter it in Queen Elizabeth National Park. All right, Anna, I hope your question has been answered. And for our other listeners who are tuned in, our listener's question is selected from among you guys who tune in and support the show. So feel free to drop me an email in case you'd like to have your question answered on the show. I will respond to you and let you know what topics and guests we have coming up. And then with that information, you can submit your question, and your question could be the lucky one that's selected for our next episode. The email address to use will be linked down below in the podcast notes, or call them podcast description. All right, and maybe just as we head towards the end of the discussion, I'd like to just bring in Dr. Alex again and ask a question around public involvement. Now, Dr. Alex, I get the understanding that it is a concerted effort that involves several parties, several players, and you did mention that on this particular study you had, was it over 100 players who were all coming from different walks of life? You had the lodges, you had the conservation community, you had academia, you had the Wildlife Authority, and several other players, NGOs as well. And I think that's definitely the way to go. But I'm actually interested in knowing how the general public can get involved. So basically, I'm talking about getting this, call it discussion beyond the closed user group of the conservation community and those that related to it, and just bringing in the public. I get the feeling that there are so many people out there who are touched, who are really connected to the natural world. My understanding is that there are so many people out there who tune into shows on National Geographic, on BBC Earth, Wild Earth, and all those other natural history style productions. And I feel like those people really develop a love for nature, they love the wild, and they would be really, really passionate to make their own contributions to such initiatives. Of course, I know not everyone can lace up boots and head over to Ishasha on some of those hot days like you folks do in the research and censuses that you do. But I feel like there might be opportunities for the public to support the work that you do. And perhaps that could give you a few more hours of peaceful sleep. So just let us know if there are avenues through which the public can play a role in the work that you do, but also this general effort to secure the future of the large carnivores.
It's a good question, and there's a lot of rhetoric, more and more about how Africa's human population is on this incredibly upward trajectory. If you look at Uganda, the population will double in the next 30 years, and it'll double again by 2100. So now, if you have current estimates, there's 47 million people in Uganda. There'll be 94 million by 2040, 2050. And then there'll be 200 million by 2100. A lot of people could say, that's a lot of people, it's a lot of pressure on the natural resources. But, there's going to be a lot of young people coming out of that population growth. And I think that we should potentially see the immense good and power that could come from a lot of young people if they are educated about these natural resources. I think a lot of this lies in getting Ugandans interested and motivated and fired up about wildlife conservation. But more importantly, we need to figure out a way of how can we create a sustainable financial, not just tourism, but wildlife economy in Uganda that Ugandans can actually actively get into. You see, the problem that I see is that there's so little financial opportunity for young people in the country to get involved in this. There's a lot of people that want to do this, that are studying at Makerere, that are at the fisheries and zoology department. But even supporting people like Bosco and Orin through our project at the Volcano Safaris Partnership Trust. We're constantly trying to fundraise relatively small amounts of money just to keep field people in the field just working. So fundraising is obviously the biggest challenge that we personally face, and that's 95% of lion and conservation projects on the continent. Is how do we get money into the grassroots projects on the ground, the people that have the passion, the fire. That's our biggest challenge.
Wow, that's fantastic. And I really liked the discussion around creating one, awareness, but also just creating if I could call it an economy that supports people to tap into the opportunities that exist in and around some of these protected areas. And I can't think of a more powerful point to end the podcast on. So I'd like to get your parting thoughts. Maybe we'll start with Bosco, and then we'll have Orin, and then we'll finally have Dr. Alex. Maybe Dr. Alex, as you wind up, you can also let us know where and also when will this strategic action plan be available for the public, especially for folks like myself who would be very interested in reading it. We're very interested in the natural world as well. So let's have Bosco, let's have Orin, and then Dr. Alex will wrap up.
Okay, thank you once again. And if I could say my last remarks and maybe what we actually would love to have in order to sustain conservation. As my earlier friends and colleagues, Alex and Orin had said, we need real funding and we need working under the same umbrella. I would love to support them by saying we need qualified people and we need a trained team which will work together and then we provide useful results. On the other hand, we also need to involve communities in conservation because these are the people who've been with animals even from before the times when these parks were gazetted. So they have really a good understanding of the biology, the ecology of these animals, and therefore we need not to leave them behind. They should be a standing stakeholder in conservation.
Yeah.
I would also love to address the fact that we need to go into schools and educate people on the importance of these animals. We need to educate people on how to differentiate these animals and their significance in the ecosystem. Many people can't differentiate a hyena from a leopard and so forth. But this is something that one has to have on their fingertips before you start conserving. Yeah, basically, that's what I could say.
Okay, fantastic. Well, thanks for joining the podcast. But just before I let you go, I know I asked Orin what his favorite animal is, and he said his is a lion.
Okay.
I don't know if you have a favorite animal or maybe a favorite large carnivore.
Yeah, sure, I do. My favorite animal is leopard. And
nice.
I love
like
it.
me.
I love it because of its solidarity and elusiveness.
Yeah.
You know, it has a special behavior apart from other animals. That's what I like about it.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for joining the podcast, Bosco. And hopefully we can have you on in the future again.
Thank you so much for hosting me. And I would also really love to be part of this once more.
Perfect. All right, now let's get Orin's final comments and then Dr. Alex will close.
Yeah, I think like Alex says, it's very important to look a bit into the future and not to give up. It's not all finished yet. Africa is an ever-growing place where populations are rising at high rates that we don't know in the West. And this doesn't always come with good things, but we shouldn't only look at the bad things. Like Alex said, there's going to be a lot of opportunity for young people, hopefully, to grow in this world, in this conservation world. Hopefully in 10, 15, 20 years, things will be better than they are right now. But those are all just things we can hope for and work towards. But you never know what the future holds. So it's an open future. It can go in one way, it could go another way. And I think that's a bit of the beauty of this kind of work, is the future is a very unknown thing. Then for the Ugandan conservation world, definitely I feel like a lot of the players are underfunded and are just doing things with the little things they can get, and just sometimes that creates situations where people are doing the same thing, but two different entities are doing the same thing in the same national park, which then causes frustrations and friction between these entities. Yet it shouldn't be like that. They should be working towards the same goal and partnering up together to work towards the same end result. So let's hope that in the next couple of years we can all learn to work together in this environment. Thank you.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Orin, for joining the show. And finally, Dr. Alex, please share your final comments as well.
Yeah, I do have a comment. How do I get in front of the president and show him what's happening? That's a very direct thing to say, but it's like, I just wish that I could have him for 20 minutes to show him these data. I just feel that I don't necessarily feel that the highest reaches of the government necessarily know how special some of these populations are and what Uganda will lose if they lose them. And that's a very brute, blunt utensil to use, but that would be my dream. How do I sit down with him for 20 minutes and show him good science and how these things are doing?
Okay, well, that's blunt, but also it's a very clear message as well. Then I also hoped that you would also let us know, I don't know if it's possible at this stage to know how soon this strategic plan will be out. And also, basically, would it be out for the public to review, for the public to study it?
So just so you know, it's not like a hidden thing. I think Julius Johnso is going to release some of the numbers. I mean, I can give the numbers now. They were presented in Kampala at the Protea. So the action plan should be ready sort of at the end of July, early August. But in terms of the numbers, I mean, if people want to know the numbers of how many of these, specifically lions, do you want me to, for 30 seconds, tell you what our results are? I can do that. So
please do.
So I'd say the most important thing, and this is what Orin kind of spearheaded on the Murchison side with Tutulo Mudumba and some of the Uganda Wildlife Authority rangers. So Murchison Falls National Park is definitely the jewel in Uganda's crown in terms of how many lions remain and in terms of how carnivores are doing. That is the place to really protect. So if you look at the Nile Delta, there's some of the highest densities of lions anywhere in Africa are in the Nile Delta. But that's only the Nile Delta. When you look at the remainder of the park, the population densities drop off significantly. But our estimates, sort of anything from 150 to 270 lions, with an averaged estimate of about 220 lions left in the park. So that's still good by Ugandan standards. If you look at Kadepo, that's a population that's completely flown under the radar. It's another population assessment that Orin basically led with Bosco, Atukwase, and the Uganda Wildlife Authority there. They spent 4 months looking for lions and they found 5 individuals. And the population estimate for not only the park, but the area outside of the park is 23 individuals. So that's very low. And I'd say even 23 is probably a very high maximum. It's probably a big overestimate in terms of our mathematics. It's a high. So that's a population that's basically flown under the radar and is, it's completely cratered. Queen Elizabeth, as I said, the population there is almost halved in 4.5 years. So from 72 lions to 39 lions in under 5 years. So that's a population that's under serious stress. So that's the lion front. On the leopard agenda, the parks that are doing very well are Lake Mburo. There's anything from about 7 to about 9 leopards per 100 square kilometers. There's about 36 leopards that are still in that park. So that's really a leopard hotspot in the country, and I think it's one that's very important in terms of a conservation agenda. Murchison Falls, again, the Nile Delta, probably some of the highest leopard densities you'll find anywhere in Africa are in the Nile Delta, about 14 leopards per 100 square kilometers. So if there's any place in Uganda to see leopards, it's actually in the Delta. It's one of the best places. Like you will see leopards there on almost every game drive. Kadepo, not so great, about 5 leopards per 100 square kilometers. The estimates there don't look particularly good. Basically, it seems that the leopards are largely mirroring what's happening to the lions. Pianupe, very low densities, about 1 leopard per 100 square kilometer, but it's not the fault of management necessarily. I think it's the fault that there's just no medium prey layer there. So leopards need things like cobs and impala to survive. And in Pianupe, you don't have any of those species. You only have big ungulates. You have roan, you have hartebeest, you have a few zebra, you have buffalo, you have waterbuck. You have nothing for leopards to really eat. So unless something is reintroduced there, I don't see leopard densities reaching any significant number because it's just limited environmentally. It's not necessarily that people are killing leopards there. And then the final one is, there's 2 others. Queen Elizabeth seems to be hovering around 6 leopards per 100 square kilometers, both in the north and in the south, Mwea, Kaseni. But we have to analyze the 2022 data, which I haven't done. And then the final one is Toro Semliki, and apparently, so Orin and Bosco just finished that survey and they didn't find even 1 leopard. So that's a park where something has happened. It's a wildlife reserve where something has, again... Do you see, Jonathan, what I mean? Where we don't even have a pulse of... We don't even know what is the stock doing in these parks. And this is why I'm saying that monitoring those vital signs is so important. And then on the hyenas, the hyena data will be released as part of the action plan that we're still working on. But as I say, end of July, early August, it'll all be there. Orin, I don't know if you want to add anything. If you want to add anything on the results,
maybe I can clear up Semliki and Kidepo a bit. So in Semliki, which we just finished, maybe a reason we didn't find any leopards is because of the weather that we were in. It was the height of wet season. The grass was quite high, so maybe there was a detection issue. But generally, I think the densities there will be very low because there's a lot of trucks moving through that area. It's become a new trade route for Congo. And historically, the communities living around that area are all cattle keepers who apparently are not the friendliest towards carnivores. Then for Kidepo, we spent around 110 days driving around in that area. We found 5 individuals, 3 males, 2 females. We did see some cubs. We saw 3 cubs in that area, which up to this point are still alive.
Wow. Some of these statistics give me hope. I was down in Makshan about a month ago, and just honestly, for 3 days, I saw at least 30 lions, and these in different prides. And this was around the Easter period. And then I saw 3 leopards as well. As in Kidepo, I did see a mother and some cubs, I think like 3 cubs. We tried to look for Lokiru, my favorite lion. I couldn't find him. I was down in Semliki. Semliki is trouble, definitely. Even seeing the grazers is sometimes a challenge. There's really need for a breath of fresh air down there. But I guess with the incredible work that you guys are doing, and I guess the critical mass that you're putting together to speak up and push some of these really important agendas, I think we are going to get there. And I hope, Alex, you can get that appointment with the president and just show him the actual situation that's on ground.
Yeah, thanks. I don't even think it's necessarily about asking him to necessarily do anything. It's more just, showing directly what is still there. And specifically with Murchison, the argument to be made is to not take the foot off the gas. The argument should be we're going it's not me. I mean, it's not me. It's not Orin. It's not Bosco. We are scientists. We recognize ourselves as scientists. But for the conservationists that are in these landscapes, the current speed on the gas maybe is 50 miles an hour. We need to be going 100. Redouble the efforts, so that when you go back, Jonathan, with your daughter or your son in 5 years, you still see 30 lions. And we don't get into a situation where we are in Queen, where we in 4.5 years see a halving of a population. In ecology, we have this concept of shifting baselines, where basically today you will say, I saw 30 lions in 3 days. But then your son will see 10 lions in 3 days, and his son will see 1 lion. And it's these baselines of our human memory of what we remember generationally that degrades. And this is what I'm saying, is that we need to, the conservation community in the country needs to redouble the efforts, because there's still something there to in inverted commas, save. There's still good populations. We're seeing good pride sizes. We're seeing good sex ratios. We're seeing, despite the fact that there's snaring pressure, we're seeing healthy populations. The signs are that the population largely, at least in some areas of the park, is healthy. And we're not seeing that in other parts of the country. So, that's where I'm saying is, again, I didn't know how you motivate people, but yeah.
Yeah. Well, this conversation makes me emotional, but I must say I really enjoyed this discussion at so many levels. And I've also learned a great deal from you guys. I must say, I don't know if I'm allowed to call you legends. You guys are doing some awesome work, and I just hope that the next time we meet, we are somewhere in the bush, just seeing some of the incredible work that you're doing.
Yeah, you should come and spend some time with us in July, early August.
Okay. Thanks for the invitation. I'll definitely check it up.
All right.
All right, guys, that should be the end of today's episode. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. If you did, go ahead and hit that like button, share the link in your circles, and let's get this conversation beyond this platform. For those of you that just can't have enough and would like to have more of such conversations, be sure to subscribe to the podcast. And please also check out those earlier episodes as well. We've had some really awesome guests on the podcast in the past, so don't you be bashful. Just go back, go through the episode list, and find one for your liking. Those tuning in on Apple Podcasts are able to leave a star rating on the podcast. That really helps us get up the ranks. We've continued to be among the top podcasts in the country, so please continue reviewing the show, continue leaving star ratings if you've not already. Don't live without doing that. As we always say, the podcast is now available on all major streaming platforms, and it can be found on whatever platform you access your podcasts from. We are on Amazon Music, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio for those tuning in the US. We are also on TuneIn, Pandora, Castbox, Deezer, and several other platforms. If you'd like to make a contribution to the conversation or send in a question, you can email me directly at contact@jonathanbenaya.com or use the email ahabenathan@pm.me. Both those email addresses will be linked down below in the podcast notes. I also would like to once again say a very big thanks to our patrons. It's through your monthly pledges that we are able to keep this show alive. And I'd like to once again do a shout out to Zencaster for sponsoring this particular episode. All right, and with that said, I'd like to thank you all for tuning in, and let's meet again in the next one.
The Jonathan Benaya podcast is not only inspired by nature and travel, but by the people that work in it and those that are passionate about it.